Do you ever find yourself struggling to understand your emotions or connect with others? Today, I sit down with Cher Anderton, an expert in social emotional fluency. Cher helps people develop skills to manage their feelings and improve relationships, even during life's most challenging times. You'll learn simple steps to identify your emotions, cope with discomfort, and build stronger connections. Cher offers a powerful analogy that will change how you think about the people in your life. Stay until the end to gain practical tools to boost your emotional intelligence and create more meaningful relationships. You're listening to the Born to Heal podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Katie Deming. After 2 decades of practicing as an oncologist and caring for thousands of patients, I've seen firsthand how our healthcare system places obstacles in your path to true healing. My guests and I will bridge the worlds of Western medicine and alternative healing to help you achieve optimal health. Expect to uncover new insights, share a few laughs, and maybe even shed some tears along the way. But most of all, we'll learn how to heal from within together. So let's dive into today's episode. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Cher Anderton, who is here to talk to us about social emotional fluency. Welcome, Cher.
Hello.
So, Cher, I think I would love to just start with what is the definition of emotional fluency or social emotional fluency. Can you define that for us so that we know really what we're talking about on this episode today?
Sure thing. So social emotional fluency is really having that awareness of what's happening in our brains and bodies as much as possible, and then knowing how to manage what is coming up in our brains and bodies, which then allows us the social part. That's our own emotional fluency. The social part is then understanding how the things that come up in our brains and bodies interact with other people, because we really are truly just nervous systems connecting with each other. They're talking to each other all the time. And so building that fluency allows us to know what we're bringing to the table, so to speak, what's happening for us, and then what we bring to the table when it comes to relationships, interactions with other humans, how we move through life. And so it's really just a set of skills that we can develop that then become competencies. And so that just keeps developing our social emotional fluency, which we can do throughout our lifetime.
And can you explain, why is this important? How does this show up for people? Why should they care about this particular thing? And also thinking about this in relation to maybe someone who's going through an illness or someone who's trying to heal. Why is this important, the work that you're doing?
Number one, we have a lot of research behind social and emotional learning. So a lot of our kids these days are getting a formal education in this in schools. There's tons of social and emotional curriculum out there that kids are getting this education in. Yet most of us in our age bracket, older and even younger, have not had that formal education. But what we do know from the research is that when we are developing our social and emotional fluency, that we experience more success in all facets of our life, in relationships, in physical, mental, emotional wellness, for people who are leaning into academics. So for our kids who are learning this, or people who are in college or studying, they're going to experience more academic success. And so the research is really sound, yet there's a whole several generations that have missed out on how to build that social emotional fluency. And it's foundational to our well-being, very foundational. We're talking about self-awareness, self-management, and specifically self-regulation. So what feelings are we having? How do we manage and process them in healthy ways? And so it's really hard to be well if we don't have the skills, the social and emotional skills to do that. We're kind of just piecing things together, maybe missing the mark in a lot of ways.
Got it. Okay. So, and actually I love that you said that, because my kids are learning that in school, and they talk about it. So why is emotional fluency and feeling your emotions and having fluency in that particular aspect, how does that show up for people, and what is the purpose of our feelings, and why is it important for us to have this emotional fluency? Maybe going through kind of the purpose of our feelings and why we have them and how this work can help.
So the purpose of feelings is really just information. So we The feeling signals begin in our brains, but then get sent to our bodies. So feelings are felt in our bodies. It's a felt experience. Most of us have been socialized and traumatized out of our bodies, meaning we live more up in our heads, which makes it very difficult to connect to the emotions and the things that we're feeling in our bodies. We, as human beings, I believe, have on a spectrum, a whole range of dissociative coping strategies that we lean into versus healthy coping strategies that help us be in our bodies. So if feelings are information for us to pick up, like our brain sending us signals, hey, this is okay, this is not okay, whatever it is, if we're not picking up those signals, the brain can intensify them. So we can get really, really uncomfortable. The brain can distract us. So we can kind of be focused on this work issue that we're having or a relational issue, anything that kind of takes us out of our bodies. And the tricky thing about this, I'm going to kind of back it up a little bit, is that these coping strategies that most of us have as adults to manage feelings, we learn as children. So most of us are operating from a very kind of childlike way when it comes to managing our emotions. And so if that's the case, back in the day when we were younger and say, I'm experiencing something really difficult, trauma, stress, whatever it is, chaos in family life, whatever, and my brain perceives that I can't navigate and manage the feelings, it's going to come up with all kinds of coping strategies and distractions away from that. So it's just going to kind of slowly move me out of my body as a way to cope, but definitely less helpful because those emotions that we experience throughout our life get embedded in our nervous systems. They're stuck there until we process and move them through. And that's why healing and growing at any age or stage is so powerful, because it's never too late to unstick those emotions, so to speak, and process them in healthy ways.
And when you say they get caught in our nervous system, can you just talk a little bit more about that? Like, what is happening there? And what do you mean by that when you say they're getting stuck in the nervous system?
So there's a lot of scientific processes. I like to keep it kind of very digestible for folks when it comes to this. But when I talk about embedded in our nervous systems, it means that those experiences, especially when we have difficult experiences and they're paired with uncomfortable emotions, they imprint on our brains in ways that can show up in more uncomfortable ways down the road. So they're embedded in our nervous systems in the way that they're stuck there. They're not going anywhere. Just because we've stuffed down or numbed out or whatever it is does not mean that those emotions are no longer there. They're in our nervous systems until we have the skill, will, and or capacity to process them in healthy ways.
Okay. And so I've had a couple of practitioners on to talk about Psych-K and the subconscious mind and the subconscious role in this. And this is one of the things that those other guests have talked about, is that the trauma, any emotionally charged memory, is just recorded in the subconscious mind. And so basically it's programmed in there just like a recording, and then it's just running a loop. And that's what you're basically describing to us, is that it's getting imprinted, and basically, even if you're not consciously aware that it's affecting you, it's in there, and it's kind of running a loop. And unless we, process, release that, and then also learn how to kind of manage the emotions. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. The wording around running a loop, and running a loop, I kind of think of it as like an undercurrent as well. Like, say in the movie Ghostbusters, you had the green goo kind of underneath the building that was making everybody feel all kinds of things. But we have this just background track running all the time. And it's really how we move through most of life. We're not very conscious. We're running off of that subconscious loop. So if we have really unhelpful ways of managing emotions, really tuning into our bodies and giving them what they need, then we're going to get all kinds of, I call them invitations, and they're quite uncomfortable at times, to heal and grow along the way.
Yeah.
And so they're just going to keep coming up. We're going to keep getting invited, so to speak, until we just actually have the kind of bravery or just will to learn different and better and healthy coping strategies.
Hey, it's Dr. Katie. You may have noticed that I talk a lot about water on this podcast. After a year of research, I've learned that optimal water needs 3 key elements: filtration, mineralization, and structure, just like natural spring water. Doing all these steps to my own drinking water took me several hours a week. That's why I'm so impressed with Spring Aqua. Their system incorporates all 3 elements in one system that is basically modeling its technology after the renowned healing waters of the spring at Lourdes, France. I personally use their Wet 7 model, which offers alkalinized hydrogen water and saves me hours each week. Spring Aqua has dramatically improved hydration for both me and my family, and I believe it could do the same for you. I recently had the owner, Kenny Lou, on the show, and his integrity really shines through in this product. If you're interested in experiencing truly hydrating water that mimics nature's process, please visit the link in the episode description. Yeah. And for my listeners, those people who are experiencing cancer, healing from cancer, cancer is one of those invitations. You know, it's like, it's a signal that something is wrong. And all of us have these. It doesn't have to be cancer. It could be anything. It could be a relationship issue. It could be a work issue. You know, these things that show up in our life that we think are, you know, problems are really invitations for looking at like what is going on with us on a deeper level. So let's talk about this. So with someone who is dealing with a life-threatening illness, cancer as an example, you know, they are in a constant state of fear, most of them. I'm wondering, how do you think about emotional fluency in terms of fear specifically? And maybe just start there and kind of tell me what your thoughts are about that and what approaches you use.
So when it comes to something like cancer and navigating the fear, especially maybe even if you've been in remission and then you have a fear of recurrence and that's coming up, when I work with clients around any sort of illness or really most issues that come up with my therapy clients, we follow the trailhead of the emotion. So while we might think that fear is just all wrapped up in the cancer and just connected to the cancer, if we can kind of piece them apart and follow the trailhead of the fear, we're going to find the root of that fear. So that can be done in numerous ways. I use a modality called internal family systems, IFS, or parts work, which I highly recommend for anybody who's navigating any sort of physical ailment, because oftentimes parts of ourselves, the theory behind it is that we all have subpersonalities or parts of ourselves. And those parts that are wounded need us to kind of reparent them and help them heal and grow. And so when we follow the trailhead to the fear, we might find, you know, a younger part of ourselves that experienced something very scary. And when we can kind of tend to that part, make that connection with that younger self, with that inner child work, we can then help them heal and grow and release the fear. And then that in turn is going to positively impact any other issue we're experiencing, including physical things like cancer.
Got it. Okay. So, and this is something that maybe if people are not familiar with inner child work, could you just describe that? Like you did, but I think that explaining what that is, because we have not talked about that on this show.
So inner child work is really, probably if you're on Instagram or social in any way, you're seeing like inner child work or reparenting, that term coming up. But most of us did not get the emotional support, the bare minimum support as children, just in and of the way that the skills that our parents had growing up. So most of us experienced some sort of emotional neglect where, you know, we're told to stop crying or stop being too much or dramatic, you're being too sensitive. And so we didn't get that kind of emotional support as kids. And when that happens, there are parts of us or younger selves that get stuck along that timeline. And so when we connect with those inner children, those younger selves, we can give them the parenting that they needed. So we can give them the safety, the love, the unconditional love that maybe we never experienced as children. And it's a really beautiful experience of things that just happen in your mind's eye. But the internal family systems or parts work is really phenomenal for tending to those emotions and those younger selves that were stuck. and can kind of be moved along and cared for.
Okay, that's super helpful because I think people hear that and they're like, I don't know what inner child work is. It basically is like giving yourself what maybe you didn't get and knowing that we can do that now in real time. As adults, we can parent ourselves and basically create that safety. Okay, so that's really helpful. And so if someone, and this is a question I have for you in terms of, are there skills that you can teach that maybe don't require someone to go full into this kind of therapy that might help them with emotional fluency around whatever emotions that come up through illness? Are there some things that tangibly people could be doing that would make it easier to manage through these? And then knowing that the inner child work is a way, if they're wanting to go in and follow, where are the roots? Where does that fear originally come from? And bringing these things to the surface, they can, do that kind of work. But I'm thinking about practical tips if there are things that people can do to help with emotional fluency.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some really foundational steps. So just 3 steps for healthy emotional processing. So let's just kind of break them down and make them accessible. First, when we're experiencing any sort of uncomfortable emotion, and I don't use terms like good or bad, because a lot of us have kind of some morality and some less helpful correlations to those words. And when we feel feelings in our bodies, they feel comfortable or uncomfortable, really. So whenever we're feeling something uncomfortable, we do want to pause. We want to train our nervous systems to pause and just take a deep breath or two. So we don't want to react and say and do from those feelings, because that's often when we say and do things that are quite disconnecting for ourselves and between other people. And so when I was an elementary school counselor, we used to use a phrase that is very applicable to adults too, which is all feelings are okay. It's what we say and do with them that matters. We don't want to be mean with our mad or hurt people with our sad. And that there's a whole spectrum of that. So we want to really just pause so that we can invite that space to show up differently and process our emotions in healthier ways instead of reacting from them. So just some deep breaths. First step when we're feeling uncomfortable is to take some deep breaths. The second piece is that we want to identify and actually name that feeling or feelings that we're having. So there's some research to show that even as adults, we have a very limited vocabulary for identifying our emotions. So this is where I recommend folks begin with just a simple feelings chart and posting it around their house. The one that I typically use with clients, it's the Gottman Feelings Wheel. It's free. If you just Google Gottman Feelings Wheel, you can find a free PDF online, and it helps us get really granular with identifying the feelings. I even have clients who have found pillows with the feelings wheel on it on like Amazon, like throw pillows and things. So super helpful to just have a feelings chart around so that we can build that vocabulary of identifying our feelings, because feelings are information from our brain. We really want to be clear in picking up what the brain is putting down. So that's why that granular and really like more in-depth vocabulary helps. So we're going to pause. We're going to take a couple of deep breaths. We're going to identify what we're feeling. And if we need help with a feelings chart, which most of us do, great. And then we're going to move into practicing some healthier coping strategies. And I use a term, it's called a feel-good plan. You can call it a bliss list or anything you want, but it's a list of things that we think, say, and do to feel good most of the time. All feelings are okay. So even the uncomfortable ones we're meant to experience. It's part of being alive and being human, which is a great thing, to be alive and be human. So we do want to lean into that. It's just that most of us don't have the skills to manage the discomfort. That's really hard. And also the meaning that we make out of those feelings that we have. We want to be really careful about that. So that's part of our bliss list or our feel-good plan, is really checking our self-talk. That has to be part of how we're processing emotions and just checking our stories and our thoughts. And I think I listened to a recent episode of yours, or one of the recent ones, around meaning making. And that's a really helpful episode to check out, because you talked about just the meaning that we make out of how many different perspectives we can have and the meaning that we make out of our life experiences. And so we want to be really clear that we're having self-talk that can be helpful and like conducive to a trajectory of healing and growing. as humans. And then things like movement, a breath practice, chatting with a friend, nature. There are a lot of things that can be on that feel-good plan or that list that's essentially just nourishment for our nervous system. It's a list of things that we can do to nourish our nervous system and get those kind of dopamine and feel-good chemical hits that we want more of. But there are two things that shouldn't be on anybody's list. And this is part of why most of us are just very, again, socialized to have some unhelpful coping strategies. Screens. We often feel uncomfortable and we go straight to screens. We want to create a bit of a disconnection because we don't want to make any neural connections in our brains between discomfort and distractions like screens or vices. That's the second thing to not have on our feel-good plan. So wine, food, online shopping, we do not want to be engaging in those things from a dysregulated state, because then again, we're creating that connection between, discomfort, and I'm going to check out of my body and lean into these other coping strategies that feel calming, but are like a false sense of calm. So those are really just 3 super tangible steps that anybody can practice. They're very basic, but again, most of us really need to lean into the basics because we never learned them and never practiced them.
Exactly. No, exactly. And what's interesting is that this list is exactly what I teach clients when they are basically in distress. It's like, first thing, pause, take a couple of deep breaths, like that, just the very first thing, just to calm their nervous system, and then identifying the feeling that they're having. And then I love how you state that, it's uncomfortable, or that you talk about this as uncomfortable emotions. And, I had to think about that myself, that I talk about negative versus positive emotions. And you're exactly right. And it's this recognizing that you're in discomfort. It's telling us, okay, that there's an uncomfortable emotion there that you don't want to stay in, and having that awareness. And then I love the Gottman feelings wheel. So that's a great piece of advice for people, because what you said, I find is true. A lot of us are not fluent in all the different emotions. We've got like a couple that we can name. Yes. But it really helps if you have that wheel and you can identify, this is what I'm feeling. And also it starts to create awareness where then people can identify the emotions without the wheel. The idea is that you're starting to learn what these different emotions are. So then you're like, oh, okay, that's what that is that's showing up. Because sometimes we don't know. We're just like, I just feel off. Like, I just feel anxious. Or, like you don't have the, exact vocabulary. So I love that. And then the feel good plan. And it's really important that you brought up that with the things not to put on this list. Yes. And that we're wanting to help people stay in their bodies and learn how to experience emotions from a safe place, from, a place where they don't dissociate, which is what most of us have learned to do through different coping mechanisms, is we dissociate and then don't feel the emotions. So there was
yes. And can I add one more, couple more things to that? So having the visual reminders with the chart, and then even making that visual list of a feel-good plan and posting it in different places. The reason behind that is that when we're trying to change patterns, which is essentially we're trying to change thought, feeling, and even behavior patterns with practicing these steps. When we're trying to change patterns, we have to get the new things, the kind of the direction we want to go, in front of us often, in front of our brains often, just as reminders. Because if we think we're going to sit down and make a list of things that we can think, say, or do to feel good most of the time, and then we're going to remember it in a time when we're dysregulated, it's not going to happen. It's just not. So having that visual to kind of go, oh, it's a picture, I'm going to keep an eye on that. And that's what I'm going to anchor to and kind of help create these new patterns. Also with the identifying your emotion and getting curious, you're essentially asking, what do I feel? What do I need? The what do I feel is the second step. The what do I need comes from the feel good plan. And asking yourself those questions just helps you connect with curiosity. Just getting curious. What's happening in my body right now? Where do I feel that anxiety? And anchoring to that and just getting curious about it versus getting frustrated, like, oh, I'm anxious again, and here I go, and whatever it is, we kind of spiral out the loop.
Stories, exactly. Yes. The stories that we created and meaning that we get from it.
So getting more curious about how we feel and what we feel in our bodies can be regulating of the nervous system in and of itself, because curiosity is connected to the reward centers of our brain. So just getting curious and asking helpful questions versus, why am I so anxious all the time? But just, I feel really anxious right now. That's interesting. Wonder why. Who needs me? Like, and that's the kind of going to the parts of like, is anybody in my internal system feeling some sort of way that I can help them with? And that's that deeper level of emotion processing that takes maybe some help from a professional to do that.
Yes. Well, and I think that as people develop awareness around, number one, the emotions they're experiencing, and then maybe where is this coming from, as you start to heal and recognize that there are some places where trauma has occurred, then it becomes easier in that moment. You're like, oh, like you get mad at someone and then you realize like, oh, the reason why I got mad is because that's triggering my 15-year-old self who experienced whatever it was, right? And then it's not like you have to go back and then like you're like hugging that, 16-year-old self and all that. I think people get confused about that. It can be just the awareness, like, oh, I see that's that trigger again. It's coming up again. And, and you can comfort yourself in a way that allows you just to move things through faster, rather than getting stuck and being like, I have no idea why what this person just did made me completely angry or whatever it is. But when you start to have awareness about those things that are in your past and what that particular version of yourself experienced when they had it, then it makes it easier to identify and move through things with less pain, less damage, less like cumulative damage as you move through the world, right? And I think this is a part that you get into with social. It's like our emotional fluency affects our social interactions and how we have relationships with others.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So building both of those skill sets, not just emotional intelligence, we need that relational or social intelligence as well, because we're wired for connection. And when our relationships are not well, it's hard for us to be well as individuals too.
Absolutely. And I think also the part that you said about being curious, this is a thing that I encourage my clients to really just get curious and leave the judgment. Like, let's just look at what's there, because a lot of times people get so caught in the story that they've made up about that they have so much judgment either about themselves or whatever it is, their body, if they're, sick, dealing with illness. It's like, if you can let that go for just a minute, you'll create more awareness that ultimately will help you, and so it really kind of, I think it can't be stressed enough that when you're doing this kind of work, you really want to be in curiosity, and frankly, with everything, I think judgment gets us in trouble in so many ways. But particularly with ourselves, sometimes we're not curious. We're just like coming down as the judge.
Right. And so that self-awareness, developing that self-awareness of what those tracks are running in our subconscious so that we can kind of bring them to consciousness and then shift them, because we can't change what we don't know is there. So that is a huge piece of even just following those steps for healthy emotional processing. We're just getting that practice of dropping into our bodies and our brains, noticing what's going on in there, bringing it to our awareness so that we can then shift it. Because the stories that we have, again, could be very childlike from an earlier time when we were traumatized, less skilled. So we really do want to kind of grow up our stories, so to speak, by considering different perspectives. And that engages that curiosity piece.
Yeah. I love that too, that by, becoming more aware of this, then you can create more, I don't know what the wording used exactly like, but mature stories, like the meaning that you made from it is what is problematic. And so now if we can bring it to conscious awareness, and as the person that we are today that is more resourced and has more emotional fluency, you can create a new story that could totally change the way that you see that experience, whatever it was. Yes. So that's beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. So learning the skills to manage the discomfort. On the other side of that, we end up experiencing more joy and ease because we have leveled up the skills. It just becomes easier to manage. The more skills you have, the easier things do become, even navigating something as tricky as cancer.
Yeah. And can you talk about social fluency and why is connection so important? You talked a little bit about this, that we're wired for connection, but how, maybe just explaining a little bit more about your work and how someone who is healing or someone who's wanting to, create well-being in their life, the role of social fluency in that, and how that can bring more health, well-being to them.
Mm-hmm. So the two really foundational competencies that we want to lean into initially are building that self-awareness and self-management that I mentioned earlier, because it's really hard to do well in relationships if we're not aware of what's happening in our brains and bodies and how it's impacting people around us. And we don't know how to manage what comes up for us. So foundationally, we start with self-awareness, then self-management builds on that. And then a couple of other really well-researched competencies are responsible decision-making. We're just going to make better choices if we're tuned into our bodies, knowing what's happening, listening to our gut, so to speak. Then there's the social awareness piece. That's understanding that, okay, I have my own story. This is my own experience. These are my thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And that everybody have their own thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. And how do we interact with people who have really different thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? They look or sound differently than us. They live in different places, that sort of thing. We really need to know what's happening in our brains and bodies at any given time in order to interact in sane connection with other people. And we just need that. We're wired to feel like we need to matter and belong. Yet, just like processing emotions in healthy ways, we really never get that formal education and how to do relationships well either. But we need it. I wrote an entire book about it, about these competencies. And the 2/3 of the book is about you. It's self-discovery, because so much gets skipped and we just go straight into relationship strategies to try, but we haven't really unpacked everything that we're bringing to the relationship first.
And so is that book, could it be better?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that's something that our listeners can check out to learn about all of this. But I think that you described something in there that I realized that I have seen in patients. So, in my career, I've cared for thousands of patients with cancer. And one of the things that can be challenging through a health crisis is staying in connection, because there's so many things that can get in the way of connection when someone's sick. One is that there could be shame, and that may be something that people aren't aware of, but that there might be shame, like, did I do something wrong? Or, how did this happen to me? That kind of thing of I think that one is under the surface, but there's other things like, the people who are closest to you have different thoughts about what you should be doing for your treatment. And so then people can start to separate because they don't want to have to explain themselves, and they're already tired with all of these things. And then there's the other piece of people don't really understand what's happening to me. And so it's just exhausting to explain it. And so then you start losing connection. But I think that connection is, like you said, we're wired for connection and to believe we matter and belong. I love that. And especially when we're sick, and especially when we're going through a healing. And healing can be from anything. It could not just be physical illness. It could be divorce. It could be a career change. It could be, some issue that's happened with your children. And I think that during any crisis, we can disconnect for many of these different reasons. But like you said, this is something we're wired for, and probably even more important when we're going through a crisis. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that, about staying in connection when you are going through a crisis. What are your thoughts on that?
So a couple of things came up for me as you were talking about your client's experience. One, the feelings that can come up around cancer, something that can be really helpful. One, just because it invites a lot of empowerment, is to recognize that the feelings coming up, that no one can make us feel a certain way, because there could be 10 people in a room experiencing the same thing, and we could all be feeling a different way about it just because of our own experiences and nervous systems. So no one's making us feel shame, but shame is coming up around the experience of having cancer and sharing that with people in our community. what I would suggest there is, again, to follow that trailhead of shame, because it's really not about sharing the thing. Follow the shame trail, which is a hard one for all of us. And again, might need professional support with that. But following the trailhead of whatever feelings are coming up that are in the way of us reaching out and connecting with people that care about us. That's our work to do. That's one of the invitations when we're experiencing anything that feels shame-based, like divorce, any sort of illness, all kinds of things. So write down all the feelings that come up around that experience, and then have some help just being guided towards meeting those needs and processing those emotions in healthy ways. The second piece around connecting with people who maybe have different ideas about care, maybe say and do things that are really unhelpful or disconnecting for folks. I think that's an opportunity for boundaries, to practice boundary setting, because not everybody can be your ride or die through experiences like cancer or divorce or anything. And that is not something that we need to carry if I'm the person experiencing the difficult thing. It's just that's not in somebody's skill, will, or capacity to show up in that way. And that says nothing about me, but I'm going to lean into and pour into relationships that do feel bucket filling, so to speak. So the circle might get quite small. It might be one or two people. And hopefully with some other resources like support groups, I know a lot of cancer support, like medical centers are having, offers for support groups and therapy and all kinds of things where you can connect to people who have a bit more of a shared experience and might be more bucket filling, but really just setting those boundaries around where we're putting energy, what energy leaks are happening in relationships, closing those up by leaning and pouring into relationships that are just more conducive to healing, really, overall.
Yeah, well, and this, what you just shared about the boundaries is so important. I actually didn't think about that when I brought up that example, but that is what I teach clients as well, is create an inner circle. And that inner circle can be really small, like it could be one person, but these people are the ones that you don't have to spend hours explaining why you're doing what you're doing, and that they will support you and they will understand you and not judge you and make you feel better. And cancer is a powerful opportunity or invitation to look at the relationships in your life. And also, when everything is going well, it's hard to make radical changes in your life. But this is one of the things that I talk to people about, is that when you have cancer, people understand when you set up some boundaries, you're like, look, I need space or whatever it is, or I'm too, busy with dealing with all the stuff. But starting to create those boundaries is sometimes easier when you're going through something like this, because other people kind of understand. And so it's an opportunity to start to practice, but you really have to protect yourself if you're going through, any kind of health crisis, but any kind of crisis, surrounding yourself with those people who are going to be your ride or die, who will walk through it with you and help lift you up rather than tear you down, I think is really important. And we have a lot of people in our lives that, and sometimes it's family or whatever, that you can't necessarily get away from them, but but it is important to set boundaries and let people know what you're available for and what you're not.
Absolutely. I heard an analogy one time that I really like. It's at any given time, the people that we really connect with or interacting with more often, their energy, just picture it kind of flowing into a blender. So everybody that you're interacting with regularly, their energy goes into this blender, and you're essentially like blending everybody's energies and drinking it like a smoothie, so to speak. And there are some people's energies, especially when we're experiencing difficult life stuff or tricky life stuff, we do not want their energy in our smoothie at all, because that is not going to be helpful, again, for healing or growing through something. Because most likely the energy they're pouring in that's less helpful has to do with their own story around whatever's happening to you or going on with them in their life. It really doesn't have to do with you.
Absolutely.
At all. But we need to be really contain it. We need to contain it and speak up about it.
Yeah, that analogy is so brilliant. I love it because it's so true. It's like you're drinking this in, you're bringing this into your being. That for me, I think is really So thank you for sharing that analogy. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the show and sharing with us. I think, I talk so much about the importance of emotions in our physical well-being. And this is not just for people who are dealing with illness. This is all of us, so that we don't get sick, right? When I went through, all the changes that I've gone through in the past couple of years, my mentor said to me, just like your patients, this has the potential to make you physically sick. And it's up to you how you move through it. And I just took that and I was just like, okay, this work, in some ways it was beautiful because I did a lot of the work that I'm encouraging my clients to do, not because I was already sick, but because I was like, okay, I don't want to get sick. And this is what I want people to understand, is that this work is important for all of us so that we can live our healthiest, most vibrant, life, and also achieve the things that we want to achieve. Because if we're stuck, it not only can make us physically sick, but it also can thwart us from achieving what we want to achieve in life.
Yes, this is it could be proactive and reactive work, meaning hopefully we're not getting the invitation that's really uncomfortable, such as all kinds of things, relational distress, physical illness, but that we can lean into it. The things we talked about today apply to absolutely everybody. And we really do want to look at just teeny tiny shifts that we can make and what we think, feel, say, and do. That's going to really increase wellness in all areas of our life. And I found that just personally and even professionally, but personally, I have several autoimmune diseases. I've experienced some pretty traumatic things. The deeper I go in my emotional work, getting to those deeper layers, the more self-trust, just grounding, remission in certain diseases that I have. It spills out everywhere, this work that we do to just build more self-trust and be more in our bodies. It really does influence positively everything that we experience in our lives. So I can't emphasize enough how much we need to kind of lean into these little strategies that do pay off massively over time.
Absolutely. Well, so you mentioned your book. So Could It Be Better is your book, and that book is available where?
It's on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere you online retailers that you pick up your book. You can also get a signed copy through my website if you'd like.
Okay. And what is your website?
It's just ScherAnderton.com.
Okay, perfect. And we will put a link to that in our show notes so that if people want to find you. But thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your wisdom.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on Born to Heal. It's been a privilege to share this time with you, and I hope that today's episode has offered you valuable insights on your journey toward optimal health. Please consider subscribing, sharing this podcast with your friends, and leaving us a review. To learn more about how you can work with me, please visit katiedeming.com. You can find additional resources in the episode show notes linked below, and remember to join us next week as we continue to explore more holistic approaches to healing. Until then, this is Dr. Katie Deming, reminding you that just like me, you were born to heal. What if healing cancer didn't have to be so overwhelming and confusing? What if you could access a higher level of consciousness to accelerate healing? And what if you had a clear roadmap to follow, a path to lead you out of the fear and uncertainty? Hi, I'm Dr. Katie Deming. As an oncologist who's cared for thousands of patients, let me guide you safely through the fog. My 6 Pillars of Healing Cancer workshop series is now available, and it's not too late to join. Choose from a range of powerful workshops, each designed to support your healing journey, covering nutrition, emotional well-being, hydration, physical practices, the mind-body connection, and spirituality. Select only the workshops that align with you, or for a limited time, buy the entire bundle and enjoy significant savings. Don't miss this proven holistic roadmap to clarity and deep inner calm to support your healing process. Check the link in this episode's description to learn more and sign up today. Remember, you've got this.